Coming to you from BRIC House in downtown Brooklyn, this is 112BK. On the show today, deportation. It's not only non-citizens who are in ICE's sights. Plus, the controversial 80 Flatbush mega project. Two local residents will tell us why they're opposed. Hi, welcome to the show. I'm Ross Tuttle, filling in for Ashley Ford, who'll be back on Monday. Earlier this week, the New York State Legislature met to discuss a process for replacing former State Attorney General Eric Schneiderman, who resigned after 4 women accused him of sexual assault and worse in a New Yorker article. We have on the phone Robert Carroll, Assemblymember from Brooklyn's 44th District, to tell us about the plan they came up with.
Hi, Ross. How are you?
Hey, Assemblymember Carroll, thanks for joining us and for coming back on 112BK. How are you?
I'm well. I wouldn't phrase it as the plan we've come up with. The legislature, the state assembly in particular, we met in the state constitution. The legislature, if there is a resignation or removal of either the state attorney general or the New York State comptroller, it is up to a joint session of both the New York State Assembly and Senate to pick the replacement. The last time this was done was in 2007 when the former Comptroller Hevesy stepped down and Comptroller DiNapoli was chosen as his replacement. That situation obviously was much different because there were, I believe, 3 years left or possibly more on Mr. Hevesy's term. And so that there would not be an election so soon to the replacement, where in this situation, of course, there will be an election, a primary in September, and then a general election in November to fill the next term. So there's really only about 7 months left in Schneiderman's, would have been Schneiderman's second term. And so now what we have done is the Assembly has called for folks to submit applications, including the acting Attorney General, Miss Underwood, to submit resumes and to come before a joint committee of both the State Senate and State Assembly, to which right now I know that the State Assembly is participating, but I don't believe the majority conference in the State Senate, that would be the Republicans, have agreed to participate. I don't think they've agreed. And so we're going to have these hearings next week.
Hearings next week to see if they will participate in this process of trying to decide who you will recommend.
Well, hearings to hear from the people who would like to possibly act as the interim Attorney General. The State Senate Republicans have stated pretty equivocally that they will not participate.
Oh, they will not participate in the process.
They will not participate in the process. That's what they've said. That's what they said this week. You need 107 votes because it's a joint session between 150 Assembly members and 63 state senators. So even though the State Senate Republicans, there's 32 of them, there are 104 Assembly Democrats. And so you're almost there if the Assembly Democrats can all agree on one particular person.
And so it may turn out where the Assembly could just go ahead with some help from a few senators and determine who will be the next Attorney General, at least until November?
Well, until December 31st.
Until December 31st, right.
Obviously, and this is where I may differ from some of my colleagues. I think, look, there are almost 20 million people in New York State. We're going to have an election, a primary, and then a general election over the next 5 months. We should let those people decide what this is. And so I think Barbara Underwood, who's the acting Attorney General, she can fulfill this role for the next 7 months and allow there to be a primary. I don't think the Assembly or State Senate needs to go out there and try to insert some other person in there. Now, I very well politically may support some other person, that same some other person in an open election, but I don't think it's necessary for us, considering the term is almost over, to go and use our prerogative that is laid out clearly in the Constitution to install an interim attorney general because this term is almost up.
Well, you say that may be the minority opinion, but by most accounts, Acting Attorney General Barbara Underwood is more than qualified. But there was this recent op-ed, actually, in fact, this morning, that suggested Assembly Speaker Hastie wants to have Letitia James be the one to take over in this interim period, which would then presumably give her a leg up as the incumbent come election time. And the Times alleges that this is to get her out of the way in the city race for mayor that would be coming later on down the road, so that it could pave the way for his preferred candidate, Ruben Diaz Jr. What do you say about that?
You know, I don't believe the Speaker of the Assembly. He has not expressed to me, and I was in a meeting with him yesterday about this issue, that he has a preferred candidate, or that he even, you know, what he is thinking on those things. I don't think the Assembly has decided what they're going to do. And it's a large body. It's 104 members. And so I don't believe the Speaker has those plans. And those plans are pretty the next mayoral election is in over 3 years. I mean, lots and lots of things can change by that, just by looking at what happened in the last week. I don't think anyone thought we would be here. So I don't think that's the Speaker's feelings or thoughts on that, but you would have to ask him. You know, it's a large conference and lots of people have opinions. I think the big thing that's important here is that I was expressing my opinion that I think we should just stay with an interim attorney general, but I would not want to go out and express the views of anyone else in my conference, or of course the Speaker, who I can say pretty clearly listens to the views of and a wide variety of views from different members of the conference. So I think this is something that we're going to keep on working on and trying to figure out over the next 2 weeks. But I was just saying this is where I think the best would be the best scenario. But I don't believe that reporting by the New York Times is completely accurate.
Fair enough, fair enough. One last thing I just want to ask you. I saw a report that the outgoing or former Attorney General Eric Schneiderman had raised about $8.5 million for his re-election campaign, and that by law he's under no requirement to return the funds. Some are asking that he donate those funds to domestic violence programs. Is there anything that the Assembly can do about that?
I mean, look, we obviously could pass some type of retroactive legislation that may or may not, be binding. That is true that, folks retire or resign with money still in their campaign accounts, and oftentimes they do give it to charities or organizations. And so I think it would make a lot of sense for him to possibly donate a lot of that money to groups that work with domestic violence and the sort. And also, I'm sure there are people who might want him to refund their political contributions. But, I think that's something for him to decide. And, I just don't know of the efficacy of the legislature making a retroactive law. I haven't heard of anyone talking about that.
Well, Assemblymember Carroll, thank you so much for coming on and providing some clarity about this issue. We really appreciate it, and we'll look forward to getting you back on the show sometime soon.
Thank you, Ross.
All right, take care.
Okay.
Coming up, an argument for why the city should reject the proposal for the huge development at 80 Flatbush, which would include Brooklyn's second tallest building. But first, the U.S. deportation machine. It's not just non-citizens getting cranked through its gears. There have been a few recent media reports about U.S. citizens being processed for deportation. The numbers aren't entirely clear, but in the past 10 years, it's estimated that at least 1,400 have been detained, and some have actually been removed. One person paying attention to this issue and also proposing a possible remedy is Cardozo School of Law professor Peter Markowitz, a Brooklynite who conceived of the nation's first public defender system providing lawyers to all people detained and facing deportation in New York. Peter, welcome to 112BK.
Thanks so much. Good to be here.
So I've been trying to get you on this show for a while to talk about your work in the area of immigration, deportation, and detention. And you said, well, let's wait until this article comes out in the New Yorker that actually has to do with a U.S. citizen who is facing deportation proceedings. And I was surprised that U.S. citizens could face the prospect of deportation. I imagine some people watching or listening to this program might be surprised. Can you tell me how that happens and why it shouldn't be happening?
Yeah, sure. It was, surprising to me when I found my first case, but after seeing several of these, it really is, I can think, indicative of a systemic problem. The case that I was talking about is Mr. Bussey, and Mr. Bussey has been a U.S. citizen since he was a teenager, and in fact had been recognized as such by the Customs and Border Protection folks that you see when you come in through the airports and other trips outside the country. But this time he came in, and basically because of a snafu, they didn't, have him listed as a citizen, and instead of letting him in, they held onto his passport and documents and had him basically work as their errand boy, collecting documents that they would need to deport him if he weren't a citizen. And he thought he was trying to help them clear up the kind of confusion. Instead, ends up several months later delivering documents and getting arrested and spending over 2 months in immigration detention.
Wow.
Before he finally was able to meet his assigned lawyer, and who quickly discovered he was a citizen, a discovery that could have been made if anybody in the government had spent those same few minutes to really investigate the situation months before.
The complication was that did he have a U.S. passport?
No, he didn't have a U.S. passport. He had applied for what's called a certificate of citizenship. And basically he had moved, he had given the government his new address, but the government started sending notices to his old address. And so he had never gotten the notices and never completed the process and never gotten his certificate of citizenship because of an error by the government.
Right, but people think probably that once you're a naturalized citizen, you're free of any deportation threat.
You
True?
should be. You should be. You should be, but sadly you're not. What's happening now is the drive on immigration agents to grab anybody and everybody they can and to drive up their enforcement numbers at all costs is leading to mistakes. And so we see more and more people who just shouldn't be in immigration detention landing there. And sometimes those are citizens, and we've seen a bunch of these cases. I actually represented somebody who was deported and spent 10 years in exile in the Dominican Republic before he was able to prove his citizenship, and we were able to get him back here. But in some instances, actually, it's other people who are wrongfully detained. It could be people with green cards who are kind of wrongfully accused of something that would trigger deportation, but in fact they didn't do it.
So this is kind of an overzealousness, to maybe put it kindly, on the part of ICE. Are there quotas? Do we understand it that way, that they are really trying to jack up the numbers?
Yeah. Historically, there have been instances where we've been able to uncover quotas. Our clinic, did a FOIA lawsuit that uncovered documents of kind of secret quotas that were driving what were then fugitive operation teams. They were quickly disavowed, but that was many years ago. What we know now is that there is tremendous administrative pressure to drive up arrest numbers. Whether there are internal quotas, it's going to take the next FOIA lawsuit to kind of uncover. But what's undeniable is the pressure on agents.
Right. So I guess that's how we can see this sort of in the larger context. U.S. citizens kind of getting garbled up in this machine.
That's right.
That we think is really impacting undocumented or individuals that in the past, like Obama, who said, well, I'm going to go after people who are felons, who are violent felons. And he had kind of a clear delineation, but we're not seeing that now.
We're certainly not seeing that now. We are seeing a clear edict from on high, sadly, all the way on high, that their mission now is to arrest anybody and everybody that they can. And so, there was a brief moment at the end of the Obama presidency where they did start imposing some meaningful prosecutorial discretion guidelines that actually did kind of protect some of the kind of most sympathetic classes of removable immigrants. Those have been abandoned entirely, and the kind of clear directive now is anybody and everybody that they can grab, that they can put through the system, they should, because they're interested in politically driving up those numbers.
You've spent a lot of time with individuals who are in immigration detention. detention.
Sure.
What is that experience like? I mean, there's a lot of languishing without knowing what the heck is going to happen to you for a long time for citizens or non-citizens.
Yeah,
right?
it's excruciating. First of all, you have to understand that they call it civil detention, but these are literally criminal jails that ICE rents out locally. They rent out space at Bergen County Jail or at Hudson County Jail or up at Orange County Jail. And so we're sitting in, people are sitting in criminal jails, many of whom have never been in any kind of custody before. And they're told often, a few days you're going to see an immigration judge, but a few days, if you're arrested for turnstile jumping in New York City or murder, something small or something large, you're going to get before a judge within 24 to 48 hours just to make sure that the cop had some basis to lock you up. That system might not work the way it's supposed to work, but there are at least some rules that guide the system. There are no rules like that in the immigration system. So when Mr. Bussey got locked up, he was told, a few days you'll see an immigration judge. You say you're a citizen, you work it out with the immigration judge. A few days turned into a few weeks, turned into a few months before he ever got before anybody. Wow. And that's the routine now. In New York, if you're swept off the street here by immigration agents and you think you're not supposed to be there, you're going to be sitting for weeks or months. We're hearing sometimes up to 3 months or more where people sit before they can even get before an immigration judge. And that means in many cases before they can get their lawyer and before they can make their case and show why they shouldn't be there. And the conditions are horrific.
Wow. Well, in the very short time we have left, about 2 minutes, I want to talk about this project that you conceived of or initiated where you're helping individuals who are in immigration detention get free legal help, legal services. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, sure. Again, if you're arrested in New York City for something tiny or something minor, imagine turnstile jumping, you're going to get a lawyer the moment you set foot in court. If you can't afford one is going to be appointed to you. And in those cases, you're not realistically facing, even a day in jail. That same conviction for turnstile jumping, though, can trigger deportation for even somebody who has a green card. And once they get into immigration detention, there is no right to counsel. And so they are then forced to face trained government prosecutors in one of the most complex arenas of law, often, sometimes in a language they don't understand, without any aid of any legal assistance whatsoever. It is a heartbreaking situation to go into an immigration court and watch that going on. And we saw that going on in New York City, and I saw that going on, and I would sit in the well with my clients waiting and see other people come through without lawyers, and time after time I saw people getting deported who absolutely shouldn't be. And so what we did is I had the opportunity to work with Judge Robert Katzman, who's the Chief Judge of the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, and we started looking at this problem. And we looked at the numbers, and the numbers showed us that there was that the kind of epicenter of the immigrant representation crisis was in the detained context. And out of that came kind of the blueprint for a public defender system. And several groups like the Northern Manhattan Coalition for Immigrant Rights and Make the Road New York, Center for Popular Democracy, worked together with our clinic and with the Vera Institute of Justice to try to advance a system. And the city council stepped up. And so what happened is in New York City, they are funding now a system, and it's the first of its kind in the country, where if you are detained and facing deportation and you don't have enough money to hire an attorney, New York City is going to pay for an attorney for you. And there are 3 exceptional offices, the Brooklyn Defenders here in Brooklyn, and Legal Aid also represents some folks in Brooklyn, and the Bronx Defenders up there, who will be representing you. And now we have kind of a system where the results are just outstanding. Before this program, if you were detained and unrepresented, you had virtually no chance, a 4% chance of beating your case, of winning your deportation case and getting to stay here. With this program, an evaluation I just completed with Vera shows that now you have a 48% chance of winning, meaning that for every 12 people whose deportation they've prevented, 11 of them would have been deported, not because they didn't have a right to be here, but because they couldn't vindicate that right without a lawyer.
So Peter, thanks a lot. Unfortunately, we're going to have to cut it off here for the broadcast audience, but if you want to hear the entire conversation, please tune into the podcast. I think it's safe to say that no other neighborhood in Brooklyn has been transformed as radically in recent years as the Flatbush, Fulton, Atlantic vortex. And that transformation's not over. There's a plan for a 1,000-foot-plus residential tower at 9 DeKalb, which would be Brooklyn's tallest building, and a proposed project at 80 Flatbush, which would include 5 buildings, including Brooklyn's second tallest. But Wednesday night, Community Board 2 voted nearly unanimously against that project. To help us understand that vote, we have two guests who are part of the group Block 80 Flatbush Towers. Henry Carrier, former VP of Community Education Council 15. Welcome to 112BK.
Thank you.
And Ben Richardson, board member of the Fort Greene Association. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you.
So before we get started, in full disclosure, I need to mention that Alloy Development, the company that conceived of the project at 80 Flatbush, has contributed to arts and culture programming here at BRIC House. For people who may not be familiar with this project, can we just kind of place it geographically?
It is at the intersection. It's a sort of triangular lot that's bordered by 3rd Avenue and State Street and Flatbush Avenue and Skimmerhorn Street. Okay. And it's directly across from the new Apple store and Whole Foods on Ashland.
Okay, well, thank you for setting that up for us. The community board voted against the project, but that's not the end of the story, right, Henry?
No. In addition, now we're looking towards the Brooklyn Borough President, Eric Adams. He has a say in this. Then it proceeds to the City Council. Steve Levin is the council member for the area. Then it proceeds to the District Planning Commission, which is a group including appointees from the mayor, and then to the City Council, and they get to vote on it. Generally, however, most of these proposals, called the ULIP process, usually gets approved, and that, of course, concerns us.
Well, so why is that? I mean, does everybody in the process have to say yes? I mean, if the community board says no, does that influence the
No, I think unfortunately
president?
what really happens, if anybody during the process says yes, we're in favor, you can pretty much guarantee that it'll go through. If everybody says no, you can't guarantee that it won't go through. Unfortunately, in my opinion, the whole process is really geared to promote the developer's point of view and also the administration's point of view, which in this case is in favor. It doesn't really get to this point until it's pretty much almost already decided. So it's a very high bar for the community to leap through.
Mm-hmm. And so so you're saying that the mayor and of course the developers pushing it, that the mayor may be in favor, as Ben, you found out at a town hall meeting when you were able to address a question to Mayor de Blasio.
Correct, yes. I attended a town hall that was hosted by council member Lori Cumbo, who I live in Fort Greene, so she is my local council member, back in December, and just simply posed the question about his position on the project. And he didn't take a clear side one way or the other, but he did kind of hedge into saying that he didn't oppose it and that it did support a lot of the administration's initiatives, such as affordable housing and schools and the like, and office space in the area. So, it was clear that when push came to shove, it was something that he would likely be in favor of.
Mm-hmm. And so let's talk about that. So it sounds like he may be in favor. Why are you guys opposed to the project, Henry?
Well, the first thing I want to say is that a rejection of this proposal does not mean that nothing will be built. In fact, as of right, the developers can build a tower taller than the Williamsburg Savings Bank One Hanson Place. So I want to make it very clear that we're not against all development. We're against development that finds a place and is going to build another tower as large as the Chrysler Building, completely out of scale, completely contrary to the rezoning that was hammered out in 2004 and again looked at in 2010, which said this 80 Flatbush Triangle was to be a transitional zone, going from downtown Brooklyn, which has a density called a FAR, an FAR of 12.
And the FAR is a floor area
ratio. Yes, it's kind of a proxy for density. Moving to 6.5, which is what we have now, and then the residential Burham Hill. And all of a sudden, developers come in and say, well, we don't like the 6.5, we want to go to 18. So that's almost tripling the FAR. and it'll be bigger than anything else in downtown Brooklyn currently.
And when you're saying tripling the FAR, it means essentially you could triple the height of a building, basically?
Well, I think the height is actually taller than that. It's basically over the entire lot is 18, so if you make something lower, you can make something higher.
Oh, wow.
So this will be the 13th largest building in all of New York, in a place that was originally designated to be a transition from again, the 12 in downtown Brooklyn to 6.5.
Well, so, Brooklyn is trying to become more vertical, and it almost seems like people are envisioning a corridor going down Flatbush that, might be befitting of the 4th largest city in the country. I mean, I think right now our tallest building is about 514 feet, which is half as tall as Houston's tallest building, which is the 5th largest city in the country. Shouldn't Brooklyn have some kind of signature project, signature buildings that we can point to, and a more vertical presence?
So I think 514 feet is the height of One Hanson Place, which was built in 1929.
Right. I think actually that may be 512, and then there's one that was just on Lawrence that's maybe 514.
Right. But the hub is across the street, and that's already at 50 stories. So that's I don't have the exact dimensions, but that's closer to 700 feet.
So what my information was dated.
That's okay. But the 9 DeKalb, which is squarely in downtown Brooklyn and closer to City Point in that area, that is on its way. That's being developed, and that's headed for 1,000 feet. So that's not really being contested. It's already up and running. And I think downtown Brooklyn, having it be a metropolis, and you can argue and have discussions about what density looks like in a downtown and what good urban planning is for a downtown like that. This area is a fringe. It's a buffer zone. So it's a transition zone that is trying to kind of grab the core of downtown and pull it to the backyard of a residential neighborhood. Now, on top of that, though, this isn't just about contextual. I mean, that is an incredibly important argument, that the context and the transition and respecting the zoning laws, which zoning laws are there for a reason. You can't have a nuclear power plant next to someone's home, next to a strip club. These are kind of all what the purpose of zoning is if you carry it to the extreme. But also, what's being asked here is an upzoning. So they're asking to wipe away the laws that were put in place by the urban planners who decided it should be the way it is, and to upzone it, which grants free air, grants free buildable rights. And so they have the right to build 1/3 of what they want to build, and so they're asking for something that if you put a dollar value on it, it's about $350 million of free buildable rights simply by going through this public process, asking for 1 million square feet of extra buildable square feet. So that's like if you went to the car dealership and you bought a Mercedes and you said, hey, I've got a great lawyer here, I think I should get these 2 other Bentleys for free because I bought the Mercedes. That's kind of the analogous of buying a lot for $100 million and getting a free $350 million.
And Henry, is there a concern that if this exception is made an exception, that it won't be the exception anymore, that might become the rule?
Well, of course. I mean, who's to tell? But it is interesting that, as Ben said, a transitional zone was put in specifically to be a transitional zone. One thing I want to say, though, is the character of a city and the buildings in that city only measured by height. I mean, the Bible had the Tower of Babel. How high shall we go? And the fact is that Brooklyn does have an iconic building, and it's called the Williamsburg Savings Bank One Hanson Place. So we do have some character. We can provide housing. We can provide what we need. We don't need to change so drastically what has been decided as proper urban planning for Brooklyn.
But gentlemen, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to cut things off here for the broadcast audience, but we'll continue the conversation on the podcast. So if you'd like to hear the full conversation, please tune into the 112BK podcast. That's the show. Ashley will be back next week discussing refugee resettlement at a time when we're admitting few refugees to resettle, plus prom season, teacher strikes, and our first installment of a new segment on Brooklyn food and drink, this one featuring coffee. Hope you can join us.